Okay, Mr. Chairman, the floor is yours. We have our quorum.
All right, call to order at 7:07. Do roll call. Gail,
Here.
Todd,
Here.
Jill,
Here.
Blake,
He's muted. Hold on.
Bueller.
There he is.
Hey Blake, you're very quiet.
He was going through roll call attendance, Blake. Blake, can you hear us? I think he's read. Yeah.
I don't know, Rick. I think Michael would have handled this a little bit differently.
I don't think Rick has a choice. Okay, so Rick, do you have everybody here except for Blake confirming? Because I just texted him. There he is. Blake, can you hear us? Blake can't hear. All right, hold on. If you, okay, he cannot hear at all.
Here, I can't hear you.
Okay.
Well, Hank, unfortunately, I don't think we can keep going if you can't hear.
Right, so hold on one second here. Let me try something else.
Maybe if he calls in with his phone.
Yeah, that's what we were looking for.
Did he, are his hearing aids in?
I think you should go over to Jill's house and sit outside, and two of you can be, maybe we should all go to Jill's house and I'll be outside. So I should be
Right.
outside.
It is beautiful out.
Like, you can come to my house. I live super close.
Here.
Oh, but you can't hear me. Sorry.
All right, everybody. What's one thing you like about Blake and one thing you, no.
Okay, hold on.
Todd, you got to be careful. It's officially part of the meeting minutes at this
Oh,
point.
that's true. I forgot we're recording at this point in time. He will find out.
He says Zoom cuts in and it keeps cutting in and out. Can you hear us at all, Blake?
He can't dial in.
That's what I'm. I'm also texting Jules, who's supposed to sign on.
Let's try Blake again. Can you hear us? Nope.
Oh my God.
And we'll get him.
Just keep falling off.
Okay, Jules just texted and said he's signing on right now. Okay, I think Blake's trying to call in from his cell, so I'll give him a minute, and Jules is also.
All right, Blake or Jules, can you hear us?
Yes.
Okay, so Jules can hear us, so we're good to go with 5. Blake is signing back in. So
All right,
we're,
Jules, we were in the middle of roll call, so say you're here and where you're calling in from.
I am here and I am reporting in from South Haven.
All right. And Rick Pullen and Huntington Woods.
And Blakemore, I can hear you guys now. I could see you. There was no sound. I kept falling off Zoom. Sorry about that.
outstanding, thank you.
All right, moving on to approval of agenda. Can I get a motion?
Motion to approve?
That was Jill.
Second.
Jules was second. All right, vote Gail,
Aye.
Todd,
Aye.
Jill,
Aye.
Blake,
Aye.
Jules,
Aye.
and myself, aye. All right, next is master plan work session. So I think we're turning it over to MKSK.
That is correct, Mr. Chair.
Thanks, Rick. Good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining us tonight. It's nice to see all of you again. I'm Anne Marie Kirby, the project manager for this master plan update. And also joining us again tonight is Brad Strader from MKSK. So the purpose of tonight's working session is to give you a quick refresher of the top priorities and outcomes of this planning process. And then we'll be going over the summary of your responses to the master plan review, which will be diving into some of the best practices as they relate to housing and transportation and mixed use development. And then we're going to show you where we are at in the project timeline and go over the next steps of the process. We'd also like to spend our time today having a discussion with Planning Commission about a few key elements, including priority areas for conserving, enhancing, and investing in the city, and areas where there are transportation improvement opportunities, and then also looking more closely at the City Hall complex. And then our discussion today will help frame our workshop with the public in a few weeks. So as a refresher, I'm just going to go over the top priorities and outcomes with you. Based on our conversation with the city and planning commission so far, we want to be sure that the plan is framed by community input. Engagement is really key to a successful plan. And then meeting the criteria for redevelopment ready communities is critical with assistance from MEDC. And a housing diversification plan is needed and will need input from residents. And then we also want to look at sustainability. That should be part of the recommendations as well. And then recently, the diversity, equity, and inclusion consultants were chosen by the city. So we will be coordinating our efforts with them. During our last meeting with you, there were a couple of questions about the equity topic that we wanted to address. And as I just mentioned, consultants were chosen by the city to create that DEI plan. This is a separate process and plan from the master plan update, but it will be helping to inform our efforts. We actually met with those consultants a couple weeks ago to coordinate our efforts. We'll also have a chapter in the master plan reserved for a summary of the DEI plan, as well as include a summary of those actions in the action table in the master plan. So during the kickoff meeting, we went over with you the summary of accomplishments from the previous 2008 and 2015 master plans and noted some action items to retain and or refresh from those plans. And then we gave you some homework and asked you to fill out a master plan review worksheet to comment on the action items from the previous master plan to determine which items you think should be removed, retained, or refreshed. We also left some room on that worksheet that you could add some additional action items in there. So far, we've received a few of those worksheets back, and you can continue to send those to Hank. But we found some trending answers so far. Your input from those worksheets and discussion from this evening will help shape our approach to the June 3rd public workshop. These examples here are what we've heard so far, but this list is longer. We just wanted to capture some of the highlights. And I put some additional items in the interactive board that we're going to be using during our discussion with you tonight. So retain, these are items that you felt that needed to be kept in the plan. Refresh, these are items that should remain, but perhaps maybe require some tweaking or a bit more detail to provide clarification. For adding, these are some things we heard from you. One important item was aligning with the DEI plan. And then removing, these actions are pretty much based on being that they were already accomplished. But again, all of these are open for discussion. So we'd like to run through those and verify with you that we have these right before showing them at the workshop in June. So now we're gonna get into some best practices to discuss as we go through the master plan process. And this is, some of these you may be familiar with already. As we're talking through these, just keep in mind what you feel will work best for Huntington Woods. As shown in the previous master plan update, a housing plan is something that the city has indicated is needed. A part of this is based on the percentage of the population in Huntington Woods that is aging. So accommodating for that population is very important. And then also looking at housing diversity, the type of housing that's available to current and prospective residents. Huntington Woods is 94% owner occupied, which is quite high. Some options that can be considered to help diversify housing options are targeted zoning changes for increasing housing options and also looking at senior housing development at key locations in the city. Both of these offer smaller housing units, which is typically associated with less home maintenance and also helps meet the goals of aging in place. So there are a lot of different types of housing options out there. One of the activities we'd like to do with residents is have a visual preference survey to give residents a sense of what types of housing options there are beyond single family homes and what kind of things they think they would like to see in Huntington Woods. So here we're showing accessory dwelling units, attached family, small apartment buildings. These are all things that we could show the public and kind of get a sense for what they would find appropriate for Huntington Woods. So as part of the RRC program, we have to look at ADUs as a housing option to explore and whether these should be allowed or not. Accessory dwelling units are usually pretty small and can often be converted from an existing garage. This option can also help accommodate multi-generational households. So there's some flexibility here for property owners. If this is something that the city was interested in pursuing, we would recommend that you focus on implementing this in a particular location rather than citywide. You kind of need to be strategic about where it should be located and determine the most appropriate locations. During our last meeting, senior housing was brought up, and we wanted to provide some more detailed description between different senior housing types. There are different types of senior housing developments that are specifically developed for seniors in mind that serve different needs. And overall, with the aging population of the city in mind, we can have more discussions about identifying strategic locations and opportunities for this potential use. And then as part of our evaluation, we took a look at some of your single family zoning districts to determine how increasing the lot coverage by up to 10% more would help accommodate home expansion opportunities to create multi-generational living options, but also provide more flexibility for work from home options. This would be limited to 3 or fewer zoning districts in the city. R1, B, C, and D are the ones that we looked at. And here we helped visualize what changing the lot coverage would look like. So this is just an example. We will have these diagrams up during our discussion tonight, so we can discuss those in more detail with you. But essentially, there can be cases where there would be conflicts with existing setback regulations. So considerations would need to be made to perhaps relax those. So that's looking at the side and rear yard setbacks. And then also in consideration of increasing lot coverage, you'll need to ensure that there's compatibility with existing neighborhood character when someone's expanding their home.
And just Brad Strader, I know Anne Marie's breaking up, at least for me a little bit, but the reason for this is we were looking at a single family, and one of the things that has come out of the comments on the existing master plan and looking at zoning is there a desire to relax the setbacks from single family districts to allow home expansions? And if so, how far do you want to go? Do you want to allow this in all the zoning districts or just some of the districts? So again, the idea here is to illustrate what the existing setbacks are. And usually when we're looking at setbacks, we would think it's largely the side yard or the rear yard. We're not going to want to change at all the front. And want to see sort of what is the tolerance from the public? Are they interested in this? I know, as we've mentioned at the previous meetings with a couple of you and talking with the administration, thought this is something to worth bringing up to show people that you could allow, because people brought it up. They want to increase the investment in existing single family homes. This would be one way people could stay in Huntington Woods, but give them a little bit more leeway to widen their footprint, but still fit into the neighborhood. And so this would be one of the options we would ask your opinion of, ask the public for their opinion, and then to see what the council thinks at the end. But that's what this is showing, some examples of where the relaxed setbacks could be for single family homes. And then the previous slide showed the zoning districts to decide if this would be allowed in all the districts, some of the districts, or no change at all.
You said I'm breaking up, Brad. Is it still unclear?
I can hear you pretty good right now.
I can hear you
Okay.
now better. Yep.
Yep, just let me know if it's breaking up. My internet connection today at the office wasn't great, so it might break up a little bit. So along with Woodward, there's currently some inconsistencies between development. It's not particularly very pedestrian friendly. There's quite a bit of parking that fronts the street. So future redevelopment in this area should be geared towards mixed use options, having parking that's screened from the street to be more pedestrian friendly, and also have more consistent street frontage and overall improve the walkable environment. And then Coolidge and 11 Mile, these have a little bit different potential than Woodward in terms of size and scale of the development overall uses. 2 to 3 stories at these locations would be appropriate to fit into the context of the character of the adjacent neighborhood. Smaller footprint multifamily options or townhomes and some sort of mixed use development that might have a housing and retail component could fit in there. And then when we last met with you, one of the main topics that was brought up was about transportation, slowing down traffic, wanting more information about the benefits of lane repurposing, as well as stormwater management. So the primary goals of these were looking to provide safer roads for all of the users of the road, and also help provide room for better stormwater management options that will help reduce runoff. And on the right here is a concept from the 2019 study that was done along Coolidge and 11 Mile to look at green infrastructure and transportation improvements, including bike lanes and adding street trees and green belt plantings. And so when we talk about lane repurposing, we look at roads that aren't overwhelmed traffic to determine if the current number of lanes is necessary. And then also look at how the existing pavement can be utilized differently to help make a safer and more walkable environment. So we looked at existing traffic volumes in comparison to the recommended 4 to 5 lane to 3 lane thresholds. This shows that 11 Mile is an appropriate location for lane repurposing, whereas Coolidge is just above that threshold, so we wouldn't necessarily recommend it there. For 11 Mile, there are potential opportunities for repurposing the existing lanes to accommodate bike lanes, stormwater management techniques, and some mid-block crossings. And Huntington Woods is already a pretty walkable city, bikeable city, but there could be some improvements made to enhance the walkability and bikeability. And we've included some examples of how that can be accomplished. So adding mid-block crossings at key locations, like I mentioned at 11 Mile, will help improve pedestrian safety, bike lanes along commercial corridors. And then there's also opportunities to expand the bike network and connectivity to other communities along out through the MOGO stations. In tandem with transportation improvements, we also need to talk about green infrastructure as it relates to stormwater management. So Huntington Woods experienced some significant flooding a few years ago. So this is a topic that should be addressed as part of the master plan update. Managing stormwater with low impact strategies, whether that's through the use of permeable pavers, rain gardens, bioswales, and parking lots. These are all things that can help filter runoff and the contribution to flooding mitigation in more extreme weather scenarios. One of the key topics of this master plan update is the City Hall complex. Last week, Brad and I toured the City Hall complex with city staff, and we learned more about what works and what doesn't work in terms of building functionality and space. Before we show anything at the June workshop, we want to go over with you the different options that might be feasible to get direction on what kinds of questions and visuals that we're going to show at the workshop. So there's a few different options that are possible, including that attached housing could be on a portion or most of all the site. Because the public safety building lacks any typical amenities, it floods on a regular basis. This building should either be upgraded or combined with City Hall. The DPW yard could be moved and shared with Oak Park or Ferndale. Those are conversations that we know have kind of happened, and that's something that's being explored. It's also possible that all of these things could be moved off-site with public safety and City Hall remaining in the city, but shifting to another location in the city. And then this diagram here shows existing conditions, the current size of each use, including square footage of those buildings. And then we also included the senior park on there. So we pulled together a few scenarios for you to consider. We'll be coming back to these during our discussion. Scenario A shows City Hall and public safety combining into a bigger building. DPW remains on site, but the southerly building, which is structurally deficient and really only being used for some storage, we're showing that being removed. And then this allows for an opportunity to expand and enhance the adjacent park. Scenario B shows City Hall and public safety consolidating into one building. We are showing the total size in both of these scenarios, about 25% larger to accommodate for needing things like conference rooms, interview rooms for police. We learned that the police officers' offices are being used for interview rooms. So that's something that's needed. This option also shows DPW relocating off-site, and then that leaves the opportunity for the site to be developed into something else, potentially attached housing options. And then the last scenario, which is scenario C, shows all of City Hall complex shifting off-site, and then the site being open to be developed, but also increasing and enhancing the adjacent park area. So total, this is anticipated to be about a 9-month process again, and for the last few months is for the adoption part of the plan. So it's a total 12-month process, 9 months to actually update the plan. And now we've moved into the second phase where we are executing the vision for the plan. Our next step is to hold the visioning workshop June 3rd, and then send out a survey in June after that meeting to capture additional feedback. And then we're also going to be talking with developers and property owners to get a better sense of what's possible and where in the city. And please join us on June 3rd at the Rec Center, and we're going to be holding the community visioning workshop there. So help spread the word to your neighbors, other stakeholders in the community, and then expect the survey to be released sometime in mid-June. We're anticipating this to be part of the DEI plan survey campaign. So there's going to be 2 separate surveys that are sent about a week apart from each other. And then there's going to be some nice incentives as well to take those surveys. And now we're going to open it up for discussion with Planning Commission to talk about some of these key topics. And then at the end, I believe members from the public will have the opportunity to provide comment and ask questions. So I'm going to go ahead and share my board here. Can everyone see this?
Yes. So Hank, we're going to do commissioners first.
Yes. That way Anne Marie can keep the feedbacks consistent.
And I'll be taking notes again, like I did last time. So as we're going through these, Brad, what would you like to start with tonight? We have a few different topics here.
I'd say the setback house, it doesn't really matter, but the setbacks might be a good one.
We have to zoom in a little bit to these, but what we did is we ended up showing if you increase lot coverage by 5% and then also 10% for R1B, C, and D, and just to kind of show where that would start to conflict with setbacks as well.
And can you see that well, or would you rather have her zoom in on each one individually to go through?
I kind of will have to zoom in on them individually because there's no way to show them all without not being able to see the detail.
Yeah.
Anne Marie, will you show the zoning map for one quick second before this so we know where A, B, and C are? You're only
Yep.
showing B and C.
Go back to the presentation.
There you go.
There, thank you. Okay. So B is, okay.
And maybe, yeah, point out, Anne Marie, the
Yeah, this
The
is
orange and the
this is
blue.
B here. These colors are close. So it's B is here and then along here. And then C is the darker orange. And then D is the red.
Okay. So you're dealing with the Bronx, the Hill, and McGovern Manor. Okay.
Part of Coolidge area.
So are we suggesting that we're only looking at R1B and R1C, or are we looking at this globally for all?
So when I talked with Hank about this a few weeks ago, kind of decided on those 3 zoning districts. So that's also open up for discussion if there's other zoning districts that you think would be appropriate to include in this study. But those are the 3 that we looked at.
Part of the thing too is that, and how we settled on excluding R1E is those are smaller lots to begin with. So allowing a lot coverage issue there where there's smaller lot, bigger houses, without this benefit of the same size, because those are minimum 5,000 square foot lots. The R1D goes to 6,000, 7,000 and C, 9,000 and B, and 12,000 and A. So there's a substantial difference in sizes. So B, C, or I'm sorry, B, C, and D were the ones that had the most opportunity to make meaningful changes to. A, the problem with was not so much that it was like that, but that's a much bigger project only because while the lots are bigger, there's an extremely high water table there and it makes it a little bit more difficult to develop. It's not ruled out, but I mean, it's just something that might be less attractive. That's up to people and that's up to the planning commission whether they want to present that.
So I guess just, generally, I guess the question would be, is the planning commission in favor of changing the setbacks or relaxing the setbacks overall? That's, I guess, the first question. Is this something that we want to bring up to the public and see what they think? Is this something that the planning commission's in favor of considering or not? And then if you are, then we can get into the details, but maybe the starting point, just how many of you, maybe by show of hands, are interested in considering this as part of the master plan?
I would consider it, but I don't know whether I would limit it, because if part of what you're looking at is allowing people to stay in the community, whether they're seniors or whether they're, younger families or whatever, the one concern I have is if we only limit it to certain zones, people don't buy in necessarily by the zone or the house that, they're buying into. They buy in by their pocketbook. And in order to stay in their home, again, it's going to be controlled by their pocketbook, and they might not be able to expand it in other locations, or in the location that they're in. But I would like to see it, if we consider it more across the board to do it, but maybe in different districts, it doesn't allow for as much lot coverage increase. Maybe on smaller lots, it could only go 5%, whereas on the others, it could go 10%.
All right, so thank you, Gail. That was helpful. How about any other members that are against the idea or consider it? Any other thoughts on that one?
I have a question. This is Todd Spurl. The aging in place, we've been dealing with that in some of the zoning board stuff that over the last couple of years. And I apologize, I'm new to understanding the concept. I mean, I get the concept, but are there studies out there when cities start focusing on aging in place as what that impacts the overall demographics of the city? Because here's how my brain works. I'm starting to look at this and going, if we're going to increase the lot size and we're going to increase and encourage others to age in place, to me, that we start losing elementary students. We start moving or losing that churn of families that is needed to keep this city vibrant. I get that we want to live here forever, but what's the, I'm moving that back upstream. How does this impact the city overall, the growth of the city?
So I would say that changing of setbacks would be more broadly appealing to people of all generations and not just aging in place. It could allow somebody to age in place if they need to make changes in their, like have universal design or something else. But generally we see probably the biggest impact of changing setbacks is keeping young people in their homes and letting them expand as their families grow. So it's probably cross-generational, or maybe a little bit more geared toward younger people who, as their kids get older and they think we've outgrown the house, we need to move to a bigger house. And so this happened in Berkeley and neighborhoods in Royal Oak, for example. People kept kind of cycling through the area and they'd move to other places. So I'd say this tactic would probably appeal across the generation, maybe a little bit more toward the younger families than the seniors. And then in terms of your other part of the question, communities that have age in place, I think oftentimes it depends on if they will allow like assisted living, or like Bloomfield Hills now has a couple assisted livings, and this is part of their aging in place. Here, we're not talking about aging in place in terms of large changes of land use. So I'd say it'd be more modest changes or aging in place compared to what other townships and cities are doing. They have a lot more open space and vacant land.
Okay, then just one follow-up. I appreciate that. That clarified a little bit. Would this move us down, this is a general question, would this move us down the path of like a Birmingham where you're starting to get the bigger footprint, bigger box homes on a smaller land size, you know?
I think it could. I'd say Birmingham 10 years ago had a lot of controversy over lot coverage and lot sizes and so forth. Some of that was 2-story buildings where they had single story and so forth. And then you don't hear much complaint about it anymore in Birmingham. They kind of turned the tide. A lot of the homes redeveloped, the property values went up. I think the neighborhood became accustomed to it, but there were certain areas where they didn't allow it to happen, and it was more controversial. These are, and they had a pretty large change of lot sizes and going from 1-story to 2-story. I'm trying to remember but it was a pretty significant increase of square footage and so forth. Whereas these are like more modest changes.
Okay.
I guess it's still possible. You could have a tear down and rebuild because that is possible, but we were thinking more of home expansion. And in Birmingham, they had more tear down and rebuild.
So how do we avoid the tear down and rebuild?
So you can do it in a couple different ways. One is the height. It's pretty hard to control, just like now, tear down and rebuild. The reason it changed a lot in Birmingham is the house prices were low enough. People are willing to go buy the house, tear it down and rebuild. So it was more, and it's been more market driven rather than regulations in Birmingham. I don't know that your housing values right now are in that same range where Birmingham was. Your home values are higher. Birmingham, a lot of places where they had it happen had lower home values, but the lots were worth a lot. And I don't think that's the case in Huntington Woods.
And Birmingham also allowed it to go to 3 stories.
Yeah.
In order to put in the extra square footage, whereas our zoning requirement will not allow for 3 stories or quote 2.5 stories unless they're in certain districts in the zoning.
That's right, Gerald. That's a good change. Birmingham also allowed people to build on the lot line, right up onto the lot line on both sides in some of the zoning districts. So it was a pretty radical change in their zoning.
Brad, just one other thing too, when we're looking at setbacks and we're looking at lot coverage, we also then would have to conversely look at maximum house size, which we do have.
Yep.
So there would have to be kind of a sliding scale with that, whether everybody gets another 200 square feet, 100 square feet for their house to accommodate what you want to put in the 5%. Otherwise, the whole thing won't work.
And Haken, Brad, when I'm looking at the drawings, your setbacks are front and rear. You're not doing anything for the safety setbacks for the 5 and 9 feet on the side. Is that correct? Those would not be touched because of fire and safety hazards and setbacks.
Typically, and correct me if I'm wrong, Brad, but the way that I see it is, you got to have a driveway. So your driveway is going to be 9 feet or you're not getting in. So that's where that stays on the 9. The 5 allows the minimum, and then you typically would butt up to the 9 on the other side. So it allows for approximately 14 feet minimum for houses. It's not so much the side, but it would be more so the back would be the least noticeable, the way that I see it, because nobody's going to see it. They're going to see it if you come front, you've got a staggered front. That's going to be like stick out very much. The sides, if there is, no matter what the size lot is, if you've got a minimum 5, total 14 on the bigger lots, you can make a pretty big house width-wise on that. So those are some considerations there, but I would think that most of those would be on the back, but correct me if you figure differently, Brad.
Nope, that's what I think too. Yeah.
Well, something like that.
On the side yard because of the driveways, as Hank said. And then you also have for fire code, you have to have 10 feet between buildings. So if you've got 5 5 feet is sort of the minimum, because then with your adjacent yard, it would be 5 feet. So you're kind of limited. You can't go less than 5 feet. Plus you need an area to get like mowers through, or if you've got casement windows in the basement, you need and bump outs and so forth on the second floor. So you really need 5 feet is sort of the minimum distance to accomplish all those things in the other side yard.
That may help some of the plans that keep coming to the zoning board.
Yes. And this, I told Hank before, we dealt with this in about 10 years ago in Berkeley, where they were arguing and zoning board was granting variances and so forth. So we made the change to allow a minor change in the side yard, and then keep bigger expansions in the rear yard, but keeping everything in the front yard. And it's worked very well in Berkeley. So they didn't have any, I don't think they had any tear downs and rebuilds in Berkeley. So. Any other thoughts on this topic?
Can you guys
Also, in
hear
the
me?
rear yard, it would not affect that we still happen to have 10 feet between a garage, a detached garage and a house. And again, that's fire and safety, reasons. So it only allows for it where it will allow for it.
Correct.
And I agree with Todd that it would allow certain things that keep going to zoning board of appeal for just a little bit of, variance, to go through.
Any other thoughts? Any
Brad, at what
opposed
point-
or questions?
At what point do we get to a lot coverage amount, including all impervious areas, where we need to start thinking about stormwater management from increased lot coverage?
Yeah, so that's a key topic. I know some communities like Ann Arbor let you do an expansion if you're doing rain gardens or other things to offset your stormwater impact. So if there was interest in this topic, that's something we could look at.
Okay, I'd like to add that in.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And we might have to take that to the level of not just the house size, but you might have to cover all impervious areas at that point.
Yeah.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay, that's victory. I have been sort of in and out, and I've been trying to follow, and my audio has been a little spotty, but logistically, how does this kind of affect the right-of-way areas? Or, I mean, Hank mentioned this, the potential for water table issues. What about some of the homes who have, sewer lines running behind those houses? I'm just sort of thinking about the potential problems some of this might create.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Blake, I could only hear part of it, but some of the things I heard you mention, like about infrastructure and right of way and so forth, would be a factor if we were talking about changes to the front yard setback. That's why we've only talked about slight encroachment in the side yard or in the rear yard, but no change in the front yard.
Brad, if I could help clarify maybe for a minute for what Blake was looking for, we do have some rear yard sewers in Huntington Woods. And as a result, the laterals don't go out the front, but they do go out the back. That wouldn't be any different than really putting an addition onto a house on a rear of probably, I don't know, 40% of the houses in Huntington Woods that may have rear yard sewers. I think that that it can be engineered to go over the sewer, or specifically, if you're setting a structure on top of it, ways to put spanner footings in, ways to, maybe reinforce the sewer lateral coming out. But the sewers in the back are also in the easement, which is where DTE and all the other utilities are in the back. So it shouldn't affect that.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, any other topics on this one? Is this worth explaining to the public and seeing their reaction, or I haven't heard from other members. Are you interested in continuing this as an option or not interested?
I
I'd be interested to hear what like the others, what people in the public have to say, but I'd be interested in putting it on the table.
All right. All right, we can move on. I don't know, maybe accessory dwellings, Anne Marie, or whatever the next topic. I'd say we should probably do City Hall at the end as the last topic. So.
See how last.
Yeah.
Sorry, the HVAC here is so loud. I'm having a hard time hearing.
Okay, so Brad, you wanted to go with the accessory dwelling structures? Rather than,
Yeah, I agree. We should segue to that with lot
Yeah.
coverage.
I don't have a diagram in that, but we can just talk about it.
Yeah.
And we can show the,
So maybe I'll
put up
say a
the
couple
zoning
things.
map.
So
There you go.
the MEDC Redevelopment Ready Community Program, one of the things they asked the city to look at as they helped provide funding was accessory dwelling units, or ADUs, as shown on the slide. And kind of there's pros and cons of ADUs. I think the intent of the RRC was it could increase density and increase allowances on existing single family homes, potentially could be sort of a mother-in-law apartment or accessory dwellings, or it could allow people to add on to their rear yard a second accessory structure. And we looked at Huntington Woods, we don't know that this is a superb idea for Huntington Woods, given the lot sizes and the character of the area and so forth. I know I talked to Hank last time we met. I was at the Ann Arbor Council meeting where they were debating the city council back and forth on accessory dwelling units and having it as citywide policy, and they sort of enacted or changed their ordinance to allow that. So that's kind of the most extreme, is Ann Arbor is allowing it now potentially citywide. We wanted to throw this out there to see what the reaction is, and then if there was support for it, then I think you'd look at either certain zoning districts or have requirements in terms of where this could go. But this is your plan, and the city and the public will give input on it. I think our feeling is this probably isn't a great plan for Huntington Woods, just because of I think it could be a change to the character of the area. We think things like possibly increasing the side yard or the rear yard setback is a better way to accommodate aging in place or giving people flexibility rather than this. But you live in the city, you know the city very well, so maybe there are some areas in the backyard where this would be appropriate, and maybe it could be a special use or something else. So RRC asked us to look at it. I'm not trying to just dissuade you from considering it, but this is up there because of RRC to see, is this worth considering, and if so, where? And then how we would explain it to the public to see if they're on board. So that's kind of my background, but we'd like to hear what your thoughts are on this topic.
Brad, what other communities around us have that or allow for that? And what size lots do they allow it on?
I don't think anybody that is that I'm aware of, other than maybe Ferndale. I'm not sure about Ferndale, but the other communities along the Woodward corridor do not allow it. I'm not sure if Oak Park does or not. A couple of the communities have talked about it, but as far as I know, they haven't changed the ordinance. The only one I'm really familiar with is Ann Arbor that changed it, and then Grand Rapids and some of their zoning districts.
Hank, did we allow it at some point in time?
We did not. Basically, the issue that we've had with this is right now our code says you can't have an accessory dwelling more than 16 feet high. So that would have to be altered for this. And then the questions became, whether or not it's a rental property, whether or not it's an office space for people to work from home. There was a number of reasons, pros and cons with it. There's also potential parking issues, you know, and now that you're going to have more vehicles in and that type of thing. But we haven't allowed it in the past. But I mean, there was a thought process in putting the maximum height on the garages.
There was a comment in the chat about how it changed the character, and you know, it could be a couple of different things. One would be people, I think some people view the rear yard as sort of their private area. So if you're adding an accessory dwelling unit, it could disrupt the rear yard for the neighbors, because some of the privacy of the rear yard would be changed as there was a new accessory dwelling unit in the back. The other change, as Hank said, would be potentially more traffic in terms of parking either in the driveway or parking along the street. And you'd be increasing the impervious surface area in the neighborhood. If this was only a couple locations and didn't happen very often, then perhaps not. But if it became more commonplace, it could potentially change the character of the rear yard and the impervious surface. So the positives, why is RRC MEDC recommending this, is again, it could increase density, it increases the tax base for the city, and it provides an additional form of housing compared to single family homes without accessory dwellings. So there are positives why RRC is asking this to be looked at throughout the state. Any other thoughts from planning commissioners?
I look at this as very interesting, but I could see how this could go south rather quickly. But I hadn't thought about, you know, a lot of people are working from home now, and it could be set up as an office kind of situation. Or the other side of it I immediately went to, there'd be several backyard bourbon bars set up. Be going around the neighborhood, which in itself might not be a bad thing either. But there's a lot of negatives that go with this. It would have to be tightly watched. I could see this get out of control rather quickly.
Yeah, other thoughts? I did work in a village about 15 years ago where we put this in. Somebody in the chat said it's a multi-generational opportunity, which I think is this village I worked with, where it said you could have this accessory dwelling unit as sort of a mother-in-law or father-in-law or something apartment, but it had to be somebody that moved in there had to be related to somebody in the home as a way to regulate it. And it worked out pretty well for like I had quite a few years. And then as those people started to move on or whatever, then they had a dwelling unit, and then they started wanting to rent it and so forth. So what started as a multi-generational benefit for people to give an option for somebody else to stay in the home. Then when they wanted to sort of rent it, then it became more of a rental property. And I think things didn't work as well as that village, and it eventually rescinded the ordinance because they couldn't control it. So as Todd's bringing up, there's pros and cons, right, on these master plans leading to zoning, and that there is an administrative function. If you wanted to say it would only be multi-generational, you had to be tied to somebody that lives in the home. That can work for the first tenant. It becomes more difficult to police in the future.
One of the other concerns, Brad, is that when you're using this accessory dwelling, it's typically on top of the garage, or would be typically on top of the garage in this. And then as far as getting seniors up there, now you're asking them to climb a flight of stairs. So that's another issue as far as that. Does that work, or are you better off giving them more square footage in their house where they can all live together? Maybe give them a separate entrance or something like that.
Any other
So-
thoughts on that topic?
Brad, it sounds like our consensus is that we're saying that this probably is not a good item to bring forward.
Now, one of the things with this item, if we consider density, is if we considered a certain area getting zoned for tiny houses, you know, to allow for more density and building something that could be sold to people, you know, or rented as titled property, might give people an opportunity to do something in a small community if there was a place to put it. You know, putting it in the backyard, I don't think the lots would accommodate it, and I think it would change the character of the community. Birmingham, again, before, when they, you know, when they allowed for building above the garages, they did allow for living space up there, of which they've now rescinded that and they're not allowed to do it. So there are properties that do have apartments or rooms or workout spaces, you know, above garages that were built, you know, in the old ordinance, but not allowed anymore. And, you know, they could build higher than 16 feet. And I sold one to somebody whose water tank busted in the garage in the winter because it wasn't properly insulated. So I don't see us doing that. And I wouldn't want to change the character of the backyard and people's privacy. But if there's a place that tiny houses could go in the community, I think it's worth considering.
I think that's a good point, is that it's kind of my reaction, but listening to those that have spoken, that this alternative might be good, but the timing isn't right, or Huntington Woods isn't the right place for it. But having a provision for kind of tiny homes, if 3 homes could develop into 6 lots or something, and somebody wanted to do land assembly, there could be something in the master plan and the zoning ordinance that would allow that as an option. And that could be I think a decent redevelopment option possibly for the city. So that is something we could look at.
Thank you.
Anything else? All right.
So Brad, when we take this to the public, can we use this to say, in lieu of, you know, exploring this, we're exploring lot coverage increase to cover it?
Yep. I was thinking, Rick, that maybe we could say, here's sort of the issues that we're trying to address or to get some feedback. And we looked at different things, and we don't think accessory housing, we've looked at it, we don't think it's the right solution because of this, but we are looking at considering relaxation of the rear or side yards and what that means and the benefits of that. So people can see we looked at something, we don't think it's appropriate, but we have another idea to address to allow increasing the lot size.
Okay, that's what I'm looking for. Thanks.
All right, Anne Marie, on to the next one.
You want to talk about City Hall, Brad, or?
Did you want to go back through the master plan goals, or do you feel you have enough information from everybody on that one?
I will tell you that I still have some coming in. People have let me know that there's more input coming in on that. So that's up to,
I think it might be hard to go through that tonight, but we can. What might be
just run
easier
through
if
again
people
that,
just
yeah,
send
just
theirs and then I
remember-
can send it out.
Yeah, what we're looking for is an example of how to do it. What is a current master plan goal that would be retained, ones to be refreshed, ones that are already either have been implemented or don't seem to apply, and then what are things that need to be added. So just maybe give a quick run through for those that haven't filled it out, what we're looking for, and maybe show an example of what we've heard.
Yeah, I can show that. Can everyone see this? So this is the worksheet. So if you haven't filled it out yet, we basically just have like the status of if it's either a vision statement or action statement. What the status is, if it was done or not, if it's ongoing, and then the draft recommendation, this is based on the city's kind of review of like what they think has been done so far, and you know, their kind of guess at retaining, refreshing, removing, and then we're asking for you to fill in like if you agree or not with this, and then if you have any other comments on that. So there's quite a bit here, but I think some of these might just be easy for you to just say, yep, let's keep it in. No, let's refresh that. And like I said, we have 3 of those filled out so far that were returned to us. So we're kind of just adding those in here, and I'll add the rest of them in, and then that'll kind of shape how the summary feedback is going to look for each one of these statements. And if you can get that to us in the next week, that would be great, because then that'll help us present to the public what we're going to present to the public. So we'll be showing, you know, what the existing actions are in the master plan, and then people can kind of be able to look at what the recommendations are and to decide if they agree or not with those 2.
And even on these goals, if you're not sure what it means, put that in the comments, or feel free to call Hank and say, especially if you weren't around the master plan, what does this really mean, or what's the consequences, or put those comments down, because that's helpful too. But
sometimes that's also just like, it just means too that needs to be like refreshed and needs more detail. So maybe it sounds like something that we should be doing, but we need to kind of provide more detail on it.
all right, do you want to go to the 11 mile and the pedestrian?
Which one?
Maybe 11 mile. So we showed an image of Coolidge. Somebody asked up at the joint meeting before about a road diet on Coolidge, and there was pros and cons, but when we looked at the volumes, it's above the threshold where we would feel it would probably work well. But 11 mile, it's only about 12,000 vehicles a day. There is really good opportunity there to repurpose 11 mile to do 3 lanes, and it would slow speeds down a little bit, improve safety by having a center turn lane, and give us more room for green infrastructure. Could potentially be bike lanes along 11 mile or other things, but certainly green infrastructure. So our initial reaction is that's worth considering for 11 mile. And then we also heard at the last meeting that, you know, it is a pretty long way from Coolidge to Woodward for pedestrian crossings, and that it would be a good idea to consider a pedestrian crossing at a couple other locations along 11 mile, or at least one other location. So our thought on 11 mile is look at green infrastructure, the road diet that was in the plan that you did with Oak Park and Berkeley in the past. Berkeley and Oak Park are looking at doing a lane reconsideration or reconfiguration to the west of Coolidge, and to potentially continue that along Coolidge, and then putting in 1 or 2 mid-block pedestrian crossings. So I guess that would be our next topic, to see what your thoughts are about 11 mile.
So Hank, what was the presentation we went through? I think it was someone that was offering a grant and to do something with road diets. And we had a meeting and we talked about road diets on 11 mile. We got some mixed feedback, that it wasn't positive feedback.
I think part of what was proposed, and this goes back even to when we redid 11 mile road, that we had talked about road diets then, and that was years and years ago. And the impetus was to slow down traffic, allow for more pedestrian friendly, allow for bike lanes. And in order to do that, we'd have 1 lane each way and a center turn lane, like Brad had mentioned. That's been kicked around for years and years, sometimes favorably received, sometimes not. In order to do that, we would need to partner with our neighboring community of Berkeley. And there's a couple considerations with that. Right now, our side of 11 Mile has a 30-mile-an-hour speed limit, and Royal Oak is 35, and then it picks back up on the other side of Coolidge. Part of that is relative to the amount of openings that go into the roadways. So here in Huntington Woods and Berkeley, while it's all residential, we have a lot more openings, and as a result, we have a lower speed limit. In Royal Oak, they have some residential, but it's mostly commercial and or multifamily housing. So they can take the 35 because they have far less openings than we do. Oak Park and Berkeley on that side tends to have all commercial or business zoning, and they can take a higher speed limit. So there, if it's going to be here and we have residential between Coolidge and Woodward, it is, and it's always been my opinion that this would be ripe for a road diet. And it might help the values of the property. I think, and Brad, you can probably add to that a little bit, but this has been kicked around for a while. And I know, Brad, you've done a lot of work for Berkeley, so maybe you could add
was
to that.
talked about 15 years ago at Berkeley, and it was very split, and they had a county grant and they decided to go forward with 4 lanes at the time. There weren't a lot of examples of going from 4 to 3 and case studies and so forth. So we've got a lot of case studies now where generally the transportation agencies and experts are saying 3 is a lot safer than 4 if you're 15,000 vehicles a day or less, because you have less crashes. The center turn lane can reduce crashes, and you have a lot of driveways along the Berkeley and Huntington Woods stretch of 11 miles. So a center turn lane and 1 lane of traffic in each direction is significantly safer than a 4-lane roadway. What happens on the 4-lane roadway is people are using the center turn lane, the center lane is their left turn, so that you get people are more likely to be on the outer lane. The benefit of 4 lanes, people like to go faster. So if you have 4 lanes of traffic, 2 in each direction, it's easier to get through Coolidge to Woodward in a faster time, or you can get past somebody that is turning right in or out of the driveway. So, so I think in some of the discussions in the past have been at least somewhat about a center turn, converting from 4 lanes to 3 to add a bike lane maybe isn't benefiting enough people throughout the city. But I think that the thing that's Berkeley and Oak Park and Huntington Woods did a couple of years ago was looking at green infrastructure as maybe the primary reason to go from 4 lanes to 3. Since there's, after the flooding of a couple of years ago, a lot of interest in these communities of having green infrastructure and ways to reduce the stormwater. So that would be one of the, I think, real advantages now, based on the last study, is to go from 4 lanes to 3 lanes to allow green infrastructure along 11 Mile.
Brad, Berkeley is also doing their master plan right now. And I believe your company is working with them, is that correct?
Nope, we are not working with Berkeley.
Oh, okay. Because
I'm not sure the status of where they are. They've been working on it a couple of years, but after COVID, I've kind of lost track of where they are. So we should probably check with them.
Okay, well, I can look at it because my family has ownership in Berkeley, so I get notices of their meetings.
Okay.
But I'm wondering where they are on this subject.
Yeah.
Because they're a little bit ahead of us, and I'm wondering, whether they're looking at road diet and what are their plans for 11 Mile Road, so that we could try to work in conjunction with them.
That's
if
a
we're
good
both
idea.
on the
'Cause
same page.
in this green infrastructure plan that Oak Park and Berkeley and Huntington Woods together, all 3 communities agreed on a road diet with green infrastructure, but we don't know if they're carrying it forward after they did their conversion of Coolidge, and there was pros and cons on the reaction in Coolidge and still or in Berkeley on that change. So they might be a little, I think anyway, it would be good to talk to Berkeley and see what they're planning on doing here, and then finding out more about their work with Oak Park on 11 Mile to the west of us. So good idea.
Thank you.
And then in terms of 11 Mile pedestrian crossing, I think, Anne Marie, don't we have a map that shows the pedestrian crossings on 11 Mile?
Sorry, the maps are not displaying correctly for some reason.
Oh, okay.
So whenever I don't know why they're not on there.
I'm sorry, we did have a map. We're kind of looking at the locations in Huntington Woods and in Berkeley of where if you do, whether there's a lane reconfiguration or not on 11 Mile, but it would work better with a 3-lane than a 4, but to have some pedestrian crossings. And that would be something that we would present to the public. But are there any, those of you that drive or walk or bike ride on 11 Mile or have thoughts of where you think the optimum locations are for pedestrian crossings, let us know now. Does anybody have an opinion of the best location for a pedestrian crossing on 11 Mile?
Oh, I found it.
Scotia.
Scotia's.
Scotia towards, what is it, Cass?
Yeah.
Mortensen.
Mortensen, excuse me, Mortensen.
How long have you lived here, Gail?
Since the late 50s. But my crossing at that time, when I grew up in the front of the woods where I live now still, was crossing Woodward to go to school in Royal Oak and making it across Woodward. And we had crossing guards that took us across Woodward, and we were never allowed to do it in one crossing. They made us stop in the middle, and they literally kept us there from running across.
I think
I will agree with Gail by Scotia by City Hall. I think that seems to be the logical place. There's a lot of people that bike and walk that way.
And the kids going across the street, you know, across to school, you know, if they're crossing there, is a good place for them to cross safely, rather than for them to go all the way down to Berkeley and to cross, or at Henley, you know, if there was a safer place.
This is
And are we
Jules.
talking,
This is Jules. That's the only place you could, seems to me, that you could reasonably consider a crossing would be Scotia. For one thing, I mean, it's the center, it's the middle point. But I will tell you that this has come up before. Andrew Pazukowski, a few years ago, there was some drive for this. I think the 4-lane road makes it impossible. You're talking about a crossing where vehicles would have to stop to let pedestrians through. It's almost unthinkable on 11 Mile right now. There's just too much traffic. And even though the speed limit is 30, my guess would be the average speed is probably 35, 37. It's higher than 30. I mean, that may be the posted limit, but that's not what people drive there. But I think as a 4-lane, personally, as somebody who's lived here 45 years, it's unthinkable. It's just too much traffic. It just that all these cars are just going to stop like that. But like I said, a few years ago, I don't remember if there was any kind of actual traffic safety. One of those, we had an entity that would do these studies for us about stop signs and crosswalks and yield signs and so forth. And I know there was an assessment made, and what Andrew was of the view that the number of people that cross that way is not as significant as you think. Yes, you always see people riding a bike across, or occasionally you'll see somebody running across, but it's not really traversed as much as you might think. Having said that, if it becomes a road diet street, a lot more thinkable than it is as a 4-lane thoroughfare.
I also think the need to cross 11 Mile may increase as that area gets built up a little bit more, as is in the plan. And are we talking about, just so I'm clear, just a crosswalk without a light? Is that the idea?
So I think the first thing is to get the idea, do we want a crossing here, what the options are, and then is it going to be a 4-lane road or a 3-lane road? Because it'll be a lot safer for pedestrians with a 3-lane roadway and a middle island. And then you can look at a yield sign or they call it a hawk signal, where you press the button to, you can put flashing beacons. The
Yeah.
hawk signal, you would have to have a certain volume that probably isn't there now to get where you stop the cars. So it'd be more likely to probably start with a pedestrian beacon to kind of signify to the motorists they need to stop for pedestrians. But there's different types of traffic control we could look at. But the first thing is, do we want a pedestrian crossing, and where would it be? And then to look at the different design techniques. And it does relate back to whether it's 4 lanes or 3 lanes, what would be more effective. But if you just do a crosswalk without any beacons or signs or anything else, it probably would create a false sense of security for pedestrians than having some beacon or something else.
Sure.
This should just be wrapped into whether or not it's a road diet street. I mean, this should just be part of that. Not, it's not, I don't think you can break it out and separate it.
Yeah.
Me personally.
The other consideration is really the bus stop there. Because of it, I don't think we could go any further east than Scotia.
One other consideration that's been kicked around is Henley, because when you cross Henley, that street empties, it dead ends right at the school, at the high school. So there's a lot of people that do cross at Henley. So that's just another thought to throw out there. But Jules's point about the the road diet and that, I mean, that's a valid point, because trying to get across 4 lanes, and then it kind of relates to Gail's story about trying to get across Woodward. But there's the things, and I think, Brad, correct me if I'm wrong, but what you're really looking for is this something we want to at least throw out there for the public or not? Is that what you had in mind tonight?
Correct. Yep.
I would just make it part of the road diet part. I wouldn't make it like a separate breakout. There's no point. Can't do it for 4 lanes. Not going to happen.
Yeah, I would agree with Jules. If that's the way the research goes and it's really difficult to do it, I tie those 2 together.
All right.
Brad, did you say that, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead, Gail.
Brad, did you say that 11 Mile Road doesn't get as much traffic to get a flashing stop right now? Because I know that, for example, but Maple is a much busier street, and Maple just went through some road diet through Birmingham and going towards Bloomfield Township, and they have a flash at Horton Lake as you cross 11 Mile Road for pedestrians crossing right there, which is just west of Southfield. And it's, you have to be careful with it. Because, you come around the corner and you look and it doesn't, but it does stop the traffic, and it's working quite well. And I like that kind of, they press the button and we see the flash a while back and prepare to stop for it. So that's what I'd like us to see along with a road diet.
Yep. So we looked at Maple west of Birmingham, and actually through all of Maple, and they've got different traffic controls depending on the speed limits. I think the volume's like 17,000 vehicles a day out in that 3 lane. So they're right on the edge of a 3 lane versus a 4 lane working, but they were having a lot of crashes out there. So, but because the speeds are high and the volumes are high, they have beacons. They don't have what they call the hawk signal, which puts in a typical amber and then red light, and you press the button and it becomes a full signalization. So it's not like that. That you have to have a certain volume of pedestrians to warrant that. And we probably aren't gonna, as Jules said, we probably don't have those pedestrian volumes to meet that. But I think you would, because of the speeds, like 12,000 vehicles a day, and because of the speeds of traffic and so forth, some type of pedestrian beacon or something else, a flashing beacon to get motorists to stop for the pedestrian would be, I think, what we'd recommend.
When do we get that 12,000 figure? Is it after I-75 was closed going southbound, and so people aren't taking 11 Mile Road going east anymore because they're gonna get shut out at, 696?
Yeah, I think that that's kind of been an average weekday count.
Okay,
So I know it changed a lot. 11 and 12 mile changed a lot after 696 went in, because 11 and 12 used to have much higher volumes than they have now. Even 12 mile, it's still pretty, I think still pretty significantly less than it was before 696. But when we have major construction on 696 or Woodward or 75, it did kind of change the patterns, but I don't think 11 mile really absorbed a lot of that. I think when there were construction in the area, the traffic more went up to 12 and 13 mile more so than 11 mile. If I'm remembering right from seeing it with Royal Oak, also that the 11 mile volumes really didn't change that much, but 12 and 13 and 14 changed a lot with other construction.
okay.
All right, so the last item would be the City Hall site. Anne Marie went through kind of options here, and this came up just to, as we were looking at, are there locations in the city for multi-generational housing or senior targeted housing? And there aren't a lot of options, right? That's why we're looking at, can we expand setbacks? Could we work at accessory apartments and maybe that doesn't work, or accessory dwelling units? This is one of the few pieces of property where you could potentially have new development. And so as we were looking at that, and we looked at the DPW yard and public safety in particular, see that the public safety could potentially be shared with Ferndale or Oak Park as an option or possibility. Public safety's got some deficiencies in the building that could either need to be renovated, or maybe it could move into City Hall, or maybe City Hall and public safety goes to another site in the city, or City Hall moves to another location and public safety moves into City Hall and gets renovated. So these are just options throwing out, but we just wanted to see what is your reaction to considering a redevelopment of the City Hall site. Is this worth, because this could be a controversial thing, right, with the public. So we didn't want to present an option or bring this up if this is not something that the Planning Commission wants to hear from the public or is interested in. So we showed kind of these layouts and so forth, but that's the discussion tonight, is to get your reaction to this as a potential plan topic to share with the public.
So Brad, someone, was it Ann, that went on a tour of these buildings and walked through them with someone from the city?
Yep, Anne Marie and I walked with Hank and talked to staff from DPW and public safety as well.
Can we put together some information on the useful life left of those buildings? Like the storage building, you're probably at plus 10 or 15 years past its useful life.
Right.
It
I think the
wasn't useful as a
DPW
dog
buildings
pound in
are,
the 60s.
the DPW buildings are past their useful life. Public safety is a little trickier because they've got some flooding issues. They don't really meet the amenities of, say, even Berkeley and Birmingham and Royal Oak, and which is doing a new city hall now. Bloomfield Hills and Bloomfield Township, they just don't have the same amenities in terms of interviewing people and the offices if you haven't been there. So we're probably at the low end for public safety compared to the other communities in the area. The City Hall site is physically is in pretty good shape in terms of the concrete. It would last another 50 years or more. It's not wired all that well for a city hall. But if you looked at this in terms of the eras, the DPW is past its useful life. I'd say public safety is kind of approaching its useful life and has some problems in it. And City Hall probably has of the three would last the longest.
Well, on this topic, this is Jules, on this topic, in my 12 years on the city commission, it's been talked about, and talked into the ground about. And until there is a concrete proposal from a real live warm body that says that they'll do a public-private partnership to offset the cost of it, this is the most viable place to do any type of multi-unit or multi-generational housing. Clearly in the city, it's with the most viable in terms of readily usable. The problem is, it's just, I don't know, I've listened to this over and over and over for 12 years. And last year there was it was an offer. There was a developer that was trying to get City of Berkeley to redevelop La Salette and have it be a joint city hall with Huntington Woods and Berkeley. And that the police operations would have been combined in a single building with separate units. I mean, frankly, I thought it was a terrific idea. There were other people that didn't like it. They thought that we would get tremendous pushback about Huntington Woods City Hall not being in Huntington Woods. I thought when people heard what the savings would ultimately be, and they would not be immediate, but they would be down the line, that there would be support for it. But then it all became moot when the City of Berkeley turned it down. The residents there didn't want it. That's why La Salette's just standing there. But I mean, this is the issue isn't whether or not it's a good idea. The issue is, where's the money going to come from and how are you going to do it? To the estimated cost to rebuild the police public safety building is about 12 million. It's a lot of money because it's everything now is very high, and that comes from our chief, what the estimated cost would be. So the last idea that was proposed, and it came from Wayne Wadika, the owner of Huntington Cleaners and the whole Huntington operation, was to move the DPW to a site in Ferndale and combine with Ferndale, Royal Oak Township. I don't remember if Oak Park was in, but there were a lot of good ideas. But like I said, it all just ended when the City of Berkeley said, not going to happen here. So, this is a long, tired conversation. And like I said, and until you have somebody who's going to come in and say, okay, I'm willing to do this and put this up and do that. It's clearly the most viable site to develop. The question is, how are you going to pay for it? So I don't know that I'd spend a lot of time on it without a really hardcore proposal to back it up.
Yeah, and I think there's kind of two thoughts on this. One is this a good idea to have in the plan so that at least a potential developer would know we're interested in it? Because that's number one. And then number two is getting the package to work, because like the Royal Oak project was, it took the right amount of negotiation to make that work. This one, the payback isn't that great compared to, so I worked with Grand Rapids and worked with a developer to take the DPW yard in Grand Rapids right along the river and worked on it for about a year and went through all the negotiations. And at the end, it was like a 15-story building, 2 sites. So it was a pretty large site. And at the end, the developer found that there just wasn't even with that big of density, they wanted the DPW to be moved and the developer to buy the lot, move the DPW and all the offices and so forth in a kind of from a D DPW yard to make it an A DPW yard. And at the end, it didn't work after 2 years of negotiations and they walked away. So these are not easy deals to accomplish, even if you're talking like a 15-story building. So
I think the idea of having it in there as a signal to a potential future developer is a good idea, but I would not, like I said, the devil is in the details. I mean, the concept is good. You know, the same concept as, oh, well, they'd be great on Woodward Avenue, where, you know, there's those buildings between Hendry, even between Hendry and 11 Mile, excuse me, and then the one south. But the problem is they're privately owned. And unless, you know, like I said, the devil is in the details, and the details are who's going to pay.
So I think, well, let's hear others, but I think the idea would be, this is a good concept. We don't need all the details are worked out, but this could be a place for new housing, and it'd be a public-private partnership. And these are some of the things the city would look to get out of it, and to see if that stays in the plan or not. So I think that's a good approach, what you're saying. Anything others?
When everybody else has commented, I've got one thing to add to that.
So Brad, I think we have to take that beyond that and put it into an action of, I mean, we can't just passively put it in there. We either want it or we don't want it. And if we need a concrete plan, we have to seek proposals for it. We can't just hope that a developer comes in, goes through the master plan and says, oh yeah, this looks like a good idea. And then just to have it rejected later down the line, we would have to commit to the idea and then seek proposals.
Right. You could still in the master plan say, we're interested in this concept and we're going to issue an RFP to see who's interested. But you could just have the master plan say that and say within 2 years or something, we're going to have an RFP to see who's interested. Here's what the options are. So yeah, I don't think you need all the details worked out during the master plan process. So.
No, but Brad, just one point on this is we have a multitude of diagrams here. I think the key for this for a developer is also going to be like, do you build a new public safety building? Do you slide it over and remodel City Hall and attach a public safety building with fire bays on the other side? And then do you take, the thing is that where the most attractive place is going to be developed would be more towards the west, because you pick up brownfield credits for the DPW building.
Yep.
So that would be something that would be, so I mean, some of the diagrams that while we have them here, it's been my appearance evaluating buildings for the last 40 years that the DPW building or the Department of Public Safety building is way further down in the dumps than I think people think. There's so much mechanically wrong with it. And I think absolutely, if we can find funding for it, we can do better for our officers. I think also that the City Hall building, while it may not need a whole lot, there is some infrastructure in City Hall that does need to be addressed. So if we can slide things further towards where City Hall is, and then you could split off the rest of the product, the rest of the property there, pick up the brownfield credits, that might be something that's attractive to a developer.
Mm-hmm.
And then if you show it like that in the master plan, then maybe you have something. This is similar to what we're looking for, and then you'll have a plan or some kind of basis, in fact, for getting something.
I'd agree with that. I think we see what the reaction is and have a concept, not that it couldn't change, but say, here is the concept and what we'd be looking to get out of the deal. Again, if there is interest, and then, as Rick said, then you would need to issue an RFP to see, because people need to know about it. The master plan is done, they're not going to know. Although we could talk to some of the developers, but then getting an RFP out would see what level of interest there is from the development community. So. And then somebody asked about, I don't know if we'd need a structural engineer architect to look at the opportunity of building on the top of the City Hall site, or to replace the existing City Hall or part of it with a 2-story building.
Basement of City Hall is bad. You can't build up on that building. You'd have to do something totally new over there in order to make it higher.
Well, that was the original, well, I shouldn't say original, that concept has been batted around for, like I said, 12 years about building a new City Hall, new public safety department, and then putting a multi-unit development for 2 stories up above it. And like I said, this would, I just don't know what to tell you about it. I've been listening to this for 12 years. My ears hurt from it. You know, it's like, we've got to do something here. And all right, anyway, I've said plenty, way more than I need to, so.
Any other thoughts?
I just said, I would agree that it needs to be in there, and it's something that we, if there's keep it in the plan, and if there's some way we can promote the fact that we're looking for a partner to do it, get it done. Just as long as we stay off men's club field, I'm okay with that.
I looked around the city to see if there were other areas that could accommodate, let's say, City Hall and not necessarily DPW is, I think, too big for, the land that it takes right now. And when 696 came through and they took the houses on the south side of Wales and put up the berm and moved the houses and so on, it was by eminent domain. The houses that are on the dead end part of Roy Court going towards Scotia at the corner of the city of Huntington Woods are privately owned. And I'm thinking that if in working conjunction with a developer, that if a developer bought the two houses on Roy Court when you come in at Morton and redeveloped that corner facing 10 Mile Road with a city hall and police department there, it could totally free up 11 Mile Road. I thought if it, maybe that's where seniors would go, but I don't know if that's going to be big enough to build a senior center, and senior apartments over there, but it's an area that's privately held. But if you looked at it and figured how to reconfigure it and tried to keep the community, because again, you have to have a buffer or protect your neighbors who've bought in, just like when they wanted to try to take Rackham over from the city of Detroit and redevelop it, but the deed restrictions wouldn't allow them to do it. The people who bought on Scotia and bought on Ludlow bought with that in mind to look at a golf course. So, the neighbors around there didn't necessarily buy that to look at a city hall, but if you approach it at 10 Mile Road and it's to the back or whatever else, or maybe it's senior, but that's the only other place where I think you can pull together land that could do something else for the city.
All right. Anything else, Anne Marie, or anybody else in terms of topics? Maybe any other last questions? Maybe Anne Marie give a 1-minute recap again of the public workshop and the format and the planning commission role.
Yeah, so like I said, we were having our visioning workshop on June 3rd, and we'll be in the gym of the rec center, but we'll have the garage door open, and there's going to be a food truck there at the same time that we're going to be there. So we were hoping to draw in some people that way. But yeah, and we'll have some tables set up for people to interact with different things, including some of the things that we're talking about tonight. So thank you for giving us some really great input. It's really going to help shape what we're going to show the public on the 3rd. And then, as I mentioned before, we have our community survey that's going to be released also in June. So be on the lookout for that as well.
And then just kind of recap what we talked about today for the public workshop. So we're going to show some of the options for residential that we're looking at to give options for people to reinvest in their homes in terms of relaxation of the setbacks and some of the things that were talked about today. That we looked at accessory dwelling units, and right now the feeling is that would not be appropriate in Huntington Woods, and explain that. For 11 Mile, we're going to look at the option of going from 4 lanes to 3 with mid-block pedestrian crossing and green infrastructure. And we'll check with Berkeley to see their reaction to that, and note what's going on to the west of us with Oak Park and Berkeley. For City Hall, we're going to say we're going to look at an option in the plan for a developer to do a public-private partnership, especially for the western part of the site or the entire site, and sort of what the city would look to get out of it as a starting point to see public reaction. And then just to remind you, I'd like to get any of you that didn't send in comments on the current master plan, if you could get us that this week to Hank, that would be helpful. And I think that covered the kind of the key things we wanted to cover tonight.
Rick?
Anne Marie or Hank, anything else?
Yeah, I think Rick's going to have to close out the meeting and take public participation before we can adjourn.
Okay, all right, we'll open it up to public participation.
I'm Bree Stagger Smart. I put a lot of my feedback into the chat, which you guys kind of talked about as we went through. Just real quick, one thing you didn't mention was for the multi-purpose site on 11 Mile, if that were to happen, I would just be cautious about restricting it to senior living only and have it be open to all, and just maybe market it and have a vision for it towards seniors. But earmarking it in that way can be risky if it doesn't fill. It can't go to others unless they meet like a age requirement. So I find that to be problematic. And I definitely think that it should, that whole idea that you all spoke about with that City Hall area should definitely go into the master plan as something to kind of hopefully get a private sector to someone to come in and help fund it, because it's definitely could be really good for the city. Just diversifying the kind of stock we have in the community and what's available to folks is great for so many reasons. I mean, it just helps to continue the life of our city rather than having like all of the same kind of stock, all having, you know, single family housing. If you diversify it, you're gonna continue to get more folks in the city. So and also it helps with, you know, there's a lot more opportunity to fill out more spaces if it's dense living, and so that will help with our taxes and things like that. Real quick, one other thing, sorry, I know we all want to go off of this call. I'm on the Zoning Board of Appeals, and so definitely would love it if you guys would consider adding in that expansion of whether it's all of Huntington Woods or just a couple of the residential zones, but increasing that, because that is absolutely what we see day in and day out for requests for variances. Thank you.
Bree, I actually have a question for you. I don't know if that's allowed, if I can ask you a question, but
I'm good.
You said you're on the ZBA. Do you have like a and maybe Hank has this, just like how many variances in the last 2 years that have been requested for that? Because I think that would be helpful for us to communicate to the public too, just so they know like one of the reasons why we're looking at it.
I bet Hank has it. I'm way too.
I can put that together for sure.
Okay, thanks, Hank.
Okay, any other public participation? Okay, we'll close public participation. Then looking for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
It's Gail. Can I get a second?
Second.
I'm gonna go with Todd on that. All right, roll call vote. Gail,
Aye.
Todd,
Aye.
Jill,
Aye.
Blake,
Aye. Can you hear me?
yes.
Such a mess.
Jewel signed off, and then myself, aye. So meeting adjourned.
Thank
Thank
you,
you,
everyone. It's sorry
everybody.
for, I know it's a late
job.
night, a late start, and it's a beautiful night, and we apologize you had to give a a big night to us this evening, but enjoy the rest of the week and we'll see you for the public workshop.
All right, thanks, Brad.
Bye, everybody.
Bye,
Thank
thank
you all
you.
very much.